Picture this. It's 1976. Disco is king. The bicentennial is in full swing. And if you walk into any American car dealership, you have your pick of 62 different station wagon models. Fast forward to today, and you know how many American-made station wagons you can buy? Zero. Zilch. Not a single one. We're talking about the complete extinction of a vehicle that once dominated American roads, outsold sedans, and defined what it meant to be a family in America. This isn't just about cars dying off. This is about how an entire way of life vanished in just 2 decades. And trust me, the story of how it happened is wild. Let me be blunt. The American station wagon is dead. And I'm not being dramatic here. When was the last time you saw a brand new American station wagon on a dealer lot? If you have, either you're lying or you time travel from 1996, because that's when Chevrolet pulled the plug on the Caprice wagon and Buick discontinued the Roadmaster. Those were the last full-size American wagons ever built. I've been getting flooded with requests to cover this topic, and honestly, I get it. The station wagon deserves its moment. This was a vehicle that could transport suburban families not just to ball fields and school plays, but across the entire country. It's easily one of the most successful vehicle types in American history, and I can prove it. In 1976, Americans bought 972,212 station wagons. That's 10% of every single vehicle sold that year. And here's the mind-blowing part. You had 62 different wagon models to choose from. 62. For comparison, there are barely that many SUV models available today, and we all know SUVs are everywhere. The wagon wasn't some niche product. It was the family vehicle. Close your eyes and think back to the last family road trip you took in a station wagon. I'm betting most of you are picturing wood paneling, an AM/FM radio crackling out the hits, and an epic battle with your siblings over who got the way back seat. You know, that glorious rear-facing third row where you could make faces at the poor souls trapped behind you in traffic. No seatbelts, no airbags, just you a thin piece of glass and the open highway behind you. If you're like me, you never saw it coming. Station wagons felt as permanent as baseball and apple pie. They were woven into the fabric of American life. So what the hell happened? How do we go from 62 models to absolute zero in just 20 years? That's exactly what we're here to figure out today, and I promise you, it's not the story you think it is. The station wagon story begins in a very different America, back in the early 1900s when most people still traveled by train. And here's something you probably didn't know. The name station wagon is completely literal. These vehicles were actual wagons that serviced train stations. In the beginning, they were called depot hacks because they worked primarily around train depots as hacks, which was slang for taxicabs. Let me paint you a picture. It's 1910. You just stepped off a train with a mountain of luggage. There's no Uber, no taxi as we know it. What you needed was something that could haul both you and all your worldly possessions from the station to your destination. That's where the depot hack came in. Basically a modified truck chassis with benches for passengers and plenty of room for cargo. The first real breakthrough came from, surprise, surprise, Henry Ford. In 1910, Ford started selling bare Model T chassis for $700 to independent manufacturers who would then slap custom wooden wagon bodies on them. Ford wasn't building complete station wagons. They were just providing the mechanical foundation. Small companies all over the country were handcrafting these wooden bodies, and there were a lot of them. In 1909, there were 551 American car manufacturers. 551. Today we've got what? 3 major ones? The contrast is staggering. The transformation from depot hack to station wagon happened somewhere between 1923 and 1929. Nobody knows the exact moment, but by 1929, when Ford introduced the first big 3-station wagon as a Model A variant, the name had permanently stuck. Now here's where things get interesting. In 1935, Chevrolet did something revolutionary. They built an all-steel station wagon. No wood construction whatsoever. Well, mostly no wood. And you know what happened? People hated it. Not immediately, but they definitely preferred the wooden versions. The wood made these wagons look expensive, prestigious even. In the 1930s and early 1940s, Woody station wagons actually sold for more than standard cars. They were status symbols. Ford saw what Chevy was doing and decided to go all in on wood. In 1936, they opened a dedicated wagon plant in Iron Mountain, Michigan. This wasn't just any factory. It was located in the state's Upper Peninsula specifically because Ford owned vast timber operations near Lake Superior. They literally owned their own forests and were shipping complete wooden wagon bodies to assembly plants across North America. Vertical integration at its finest. But the Woody wagon had a dirty little secret. They were absolute nightmares to maintain. The wood needed constant babying. You had to varnish it regularly, check for rot, inspect every joint to make sure nothing was coming loose. These cars demanded attention like a needy houseplant, which eventually led to the all-steel revolution. Imagine having to refinish your car like it's a piece of furniture every single year. No thank you. The real turning point came after World War II. In 1946, Willis, yes, the Jeep company, introduced something that changed everything. The first family-sized all-steel production wagon. Despite having fake wood-look sides painted on, the 1946 Willis Jeep station wagon was structurally all steel. This was massive. They kept the wood grain aesthetic because people still associated it with quality, but underneath, it was modern steel construction. By 1949, the writing was on the wall for real Woodies. Plymouth dropped the Suburban, an all-steel wagon that looked fantastic and didn't require you to moonlight as a carpenter. After Plymouth's Suburban hit the market in 1949, wooden wagons were discontinued altogether. Sure, some companies kept using actual wood trim through the mid-1950s, but after that, pure fakery. Just vinyl graphics pretending to be wood. Which, when you think about it, is a perfect metaphor for how America itself was changing. All surface, new substance. Now we're getting to the good stuff, the golden age of the station wagon. If you want to understand why these vehicles became such a phenomenon, you have to understand what was happening in post-World War II America. We're talking about the explosive birth of the suburbs, the construction of the interstate highway system, and of course, the baby boom. Suddenly, millions of Americans needed a car that could handle bigger families, longer trips, and all the stuff that came with the new American lifestyle. The 1950s were when things went absolutely nuclear. Station wagon sales skyrocketed from less than 3% of U.S. car production in 1950 to nearly 17% of the entire market by the end of the decade. Let that sink in. In just 10 years, wagons went from a niche curiosity to nearly 1 in 5 cars sold. That's not growth, that's an explosion. And here's something remarkable. In 1958, the top-selling body style in the Plymouth lineup was the station wagon. Not the sedan, not the coupe, the wagon. That's like if Tesla announced today that the Cybertruck was outselling the Model 3. It was a complete upset of conventional wisdom. What made these wagons so special? Well, for starters, they were absolutely enormous, genuine land yachts. These weren't just cars, they were rolling living rooms. Take the 1968 Ford Country Squire. This beast measured over 218 inches long. That's more than 18 feet of Detroit steel. For comparison, a modern Chevy Tahoe, which everyone considers huge, is only about 210 inches long. Yeah, your big SUV is actually smaller than Grandpa's grocery getter. But it wasn't just about size. These wagons represented something much bigger. They were the American dream on wheels. Americans wanted it all, or at least way more than what they'd experienced during the Depression and war years. And the station wagon was designed to deliver it all. The ultimate multi-purpose vehicle that could encompass their expanded horizons. A large family, a suburban house, hobbies, recreation, and yes, even prestige. The variety was mind-blowing. Remember those 62 models I mentioned earlier? Let me break down what that actually meant. You had 2-door wagons, 4-door wagons, wagons with B-pillars, pillarless hardtop wagons, wagons with 2 rows of seats, wagons with 3 rows. Some had rear-facing third rows, some had side-facing jump seats. The tailgates alone were engineering marvels. Some swung out like doors, some dropped down like pickup trucks. And GM even invented the clamshell design where the rear window retracted into the roof while the tailgate dropped down, getting completely out of the way. The 1960s brought even more innovation. This was the era of the Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser with its raised roof and skylights. Yeah, panoramic roofs aren't some modern Tesla invention. Buick and Oldsmobile were putting glass panels and wagon roofs back in the 60s, giving passengers a view of the sky as they cruised down the highway. You had compact wagons like the Ford Falcon, mid-size wagons like the Chevelle, and full-size behemoths that could seat 9 people comfortably. Well, comfortably if you didn't mind being wedged shoulder to shoulder with your siblings for 8 hours straight. Let me tell you about the cultural impact these things had. In the 1960s and early 70s, if you were a middle-class American family, you probably owned a station wagon. Period. It was just what you did. These weren't merely transportation. They were mobile command center for the American family. Soccer practice, grocery runs, camping trips, driving to grandma's house 3 states away. The wagon did it all without complaint. And the marketing? Oh man, the marketing was genius. Ford called their top trim wagons Country Squire to make you feel like landed gentry. Chrysler had the town and country. See, it could handle both your urban commute and your weekend escapes to the countryside. Every manufacturer had their own wood grain trim packages, and even though by the 1960s it was all just vinyl stickers, people ate it up. That fake would said, "I've made it," louder than any chrome badge ever could. The performance wasn't shabby either. These wagons weren't just about hauling groceries. By the late 1960s, you could get a station wagon with a big block V8 that would absolutely scream. We're talking 400 plus cubic inch engines in some cases. Sure, they got about 8 miles per gallon, but gas was cheap in America, was on top of the world. What could possibly go wrong? Now I need to talk numbers, and I know some of you are thinking, oh no, not financial talk. But stick with me, because this is where the story gets really interesting. See, on the surface, the station wagon business looked fantastic through the early 1970s. Sales were strong, profits were good. Detroit was cranking out wagons as fast as they could stamp steel. But there were warning signs if you knew where to look. Let me explain this simply. When you're running a business, you want low costs and high prices. Basic stuff, right? The problem with station wagons was they were expensive to build. You had all the mechanical components of a regular car, plus a longer frame, bigger roof, more glass, additional seats, and beefier suspension to handle cargo loads. These things added up. But here's the kicker. You couldn't charge that much more for them. In 1970, when wagon sales peaked at 972,212 units, representing 10% of total automobile sales, the big three were making decent money per unit, but not spectacular money. Profit margins were actually better on sedans because they were simpler to manufacture. As long as volume stayed high, though, everything was fine. Then October 1973 happened. In October 1973, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries announced a total oil embargo against the United States. If you weren't alive then, it's nearly impossible to explain how insane things got. Oil prices shot up nearly 300%, from $3 per barrel to nearly $12 globally. Imagine waking up tomorrow and gas costs 4 times what it does today. That's what Americans faced overnight. The impact was immediate and devastating. Motorists faced long lines at gas stations beginning in summer 1972 and escalating by summer 1973. People were waiting hours just to buy gas. And when they finally reached the pump, they were limited to 10 gallons or less. Some stations implemented odd-even rationing based on your license plate number. It was complete chaos. Now you might think, well, that would affect all cars equally, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. Station wagons were particularly vulnerable because they were gas-guzzling monsters. We're talking vehicles that got maybe 10 to 12 miles per gallon on a good day, downhill with a tailwind. When gas quadrupled in price, and you could barely find it anyway, suddenly that big, beautiful wagon in your driveway looked less like the American dream and more like an albatross around your neck. The sales numbers tell a brutal story. After hitting that peak of nearly 1 million units in 1970, wagon sales started sliding. By 1974 and 1975, they had absolutely cratered. Full-size station wagon sales dropped off a cliff. Chrysler saw the writing on the wall first and made a shocking move. They completely discontinued all their full-size wagons in 1978. Think about that for a second. One of the big three just said, "Nope, we're done," and walked away from the full-size wagon market entirely. But it gets worse. Not only were wagons expensive to fuel, they were expensive to build, and the auto industry was facing brutal new challenges. The introduction of strict emission standards in 1972 meant manufacturers had to spend millions redesigning engines. Those big V8s that powered these wagons had to be strangled to meet emission requirements, which paradoxically made them even less fuel efficient. It was a death spiral. So here we are in the late 1970s, and the station wagon is bleeding out. But honestly, the gas crisis and emission standards were just softening it up. The real killer was about to arrive, and it came from an unexpected source. Chrysler, the same company that had just abandoned full-size wagons. Lee Iacocca had just taken over at Chrysler, and the company was circling the drain. They needed something revolutionary, not evolutionary. In 1984, they unveiled it, the minivan. The Dodge Caravan and Plymouth Voyager changed everything overnight. Minivans performed family hauling duties better than station wagons ever could, and they were offered at a more approachable price point. Think about the genius of the minivan. More interior space than a wagon, but on a shorter overall length. Sliding doors that made loading kids in tight parking lots infinitely easier. Higher seating position giving drivers better visibility. Built on car platforms, so they drove better than traditional vans but could carry more than wagons. It was a masterclass in product design. But there was another factor that nobody really talks about: image. By the 1980s, station wagons had become deeply, profoundly uncool. They were associated with boring, conformist suburbanites, with everything that was square about the 1950s and 60s. If you were a baby boomer who'd grown up riding in the back of your parents' Country Squire, the last thing on earth you wanted was to buy one yourself. You wanted something different, something that screamed you weren't your parents. The minivan was different enough to feel fresh, but it was really just the first devastating blow. The knockout punch came from Japan, and it wore hiking boots. I'm talking about the SUV revolution, specifically vehicles like the Jeep Cherokee, which debuted in 1984. Now, SUVs had existed before, the Suburban, Wagoneer, Bronco, but these were truck-based vehicles that rode like, well, trucks. Bone-rattling, kidney-punishing trucks. The Cherokee was different. It was smaller, had 4 doors, featured modern styling, and, critically, it was marketed as a lifestyle vehicle. You weren't buying a truck. You were buying into an image of outdoor adventure and rugged capability. Never mind that 99% of Cherokee owners never left pavement. Then came the flood. Toyota 4Runner in 1984, Nissan Pathfinder in 1986, Ford Explorer in 1990. Each one took another massive bite out of the wagon market. By the early 1990s, the writing wasn't just on the wall. It was in blazing neon lights 10 feet tall. The few remaining American wagon manufacturers were hemorrhaging money on every single unit sold. Let me give you perspective on how complete and utter the collapse was. In 1991, station wagons were still hanging on, but the decline was catastrophic. By 2004, there were just 26 wagon models available total, including only 2 from Ford, 1 from Chrysler, and 1 from General Motors. By 2016, only 8 remained. The last gasps were particularly painful to watch. Ford Taurus wagon, discontinued in 2005. Focus wagon, gone by 2008. GM held on longest with the Caprice and Roadmaster, but even they threw in the towel in 1996. The final insult? Many of these last wagons were just rebadged versions of each other. The Caprice, Roadmaster, and Olds Custom Cruiser were basically the same car with different grills. It was like watching a former champion boxer who can barely stand but refuses to stay down. What really sealed the wagon's fate was a perfect storm of factors that all hit simultaneously. First, CAFE standards corporate average fuel economy made it harder for manufacturers to justify building big, thirsty wagons. But here's the insane part. Trucks and SUVs had different, more lenient standards. So manufacturers could build a Suburban that got worse mileage than a Caprice wagon, but faced less regulatory pressure. Talk about perverse incentives creating the exact opposite of the intended outcome. Second, the profit margins on SUVs were absolutely obscene. An Explorer cost maybe $1,000 more to build than a Taurus wagon, but sold for $5,000 to $10,000 more. If you're running a car company with limited production capacity, which one are you going to choose? It's not even a question. Third, and this is what really frustrates me, Americans convinced themselves they needed SUVs for safety and off-road capability when 99% never went off-road and the safety advantage was mostly about being bigger than the other guy, creating an arms race of vehicle size. We traded genuine practicality for perception, and the wagon paid the ultimate price. Where are we today? Well, believe it or not, the station wagon isn't completely dead in America. It's more like it's in a coma with European doctors trying desperately to keep it alive. European manufacturers like Audi, Volvo, BMW, and Mercedes-Benz continued offering station wagons in their North American lineup, though they refuse to call them that. Instead, they're Avents, Tourings, and Estates because apparently station wagon is a dirty phrase now, like calling someone's baby ugly. The numbers are genuinely depressing. In 2015, U.S. sales of station wagons accounted for just 1.1% of all automotive sales. That's 188,959 wagons sold that entire year, less than what Ford sells of the F-150 in 2 months. Let that sink in. The F-150 outsells the entire wagon segment 6-1 annually. But here's what's truly interesting and deeply ironic. Remember how I said SUVs kill the wagon? Well, now we have these things called crossovers that are basically lifted wagons with an identity crisis. Think about it. What's a Honda CR-V or Toyota RAV for except a tall wagon? They're built on car platforms, have a rear hatch, seat 5 to 7 people. The only real difference is they sit a few inches higher and have plastic cladding on the wheel wells to look rugged. Subaru figured this out first. When the Outback launched in 1994, it was literally just a legacy wagon with a lift kit and some adventurous styling cues. But Subaru was brilliant. They marketed it as something completely new, not as a wagon. And it worked spectacularly. The Outback became one of Subaru's best sellers, proof that Americans will absolutely buy wagons as long as you don't call them wagons. There have been a few brave attempts at wagon revivals, all of which crashed and burned spectacularly. Cadillac tried with the CTS Sport wagon from 2010 to 2014. It was gorgeous, handled like a dream, and had a V8 option that would blow the doors off most sports cars. It sold about as well as ice cream in Antarctica. BMW gave up on their 5 Series Touring after selling only 400 units in 2009. The most recent casualty was the Buick Regal Tour X, which limped along from 2018 to 2020. 2 years. That's all it lasted. And this was genuinely a great car. Comfortable, practical, good-looking, reasonably priced. But Americans looked at it and said, nah, I'll take the Enclave instead, which is basically the same car, but taller and thirstier. What would it take for wagons to make a real comeback? Honestly, I think the ship has sailed, caught fire, and sunk to the bottom of the ocean. The entire infrastructure of American life has been redesigned around SUVs and crossovers. Parking spaces are sized for them. Drive-thrus are heightened for them. And most importantly, American self-image is completely tied up in them. We've convinced ourselves we need to sit up high, that we need commanding seating positions, that we might suddenly need to ford a river on the way to soccer practice. It's absurd, but it's deeply embedded in our culture now. The only way I see wagons making a genuine comeback is if gas hits $10 a gallon and stays there for years, or if there's some massive cultural shift where efficiency becomes cool again. But even then, we'd probably just make smaller SUVs rather than admit wagons make more sense. We're stubborn like that. You know, researching this made me realize something personal. I never actually got to experience the golden age of station wagons. By the time I was born, they were already circling the drain. But I do remember seeing the last stragglers, maybe a beat-up Taurus wagon in a grocery store parking lot, or someone's old Volvo 240 that just refused to die. And every time I saw one, it felt like spotting an endangered species in the wild. What made wagons special wasn't the fuel economy, horrible, the handling, like piloting a couch, or even the looks. Let's be honest, most were pretty ugly. It was what they represented. They were the ultimate family car in an era when family meant something very specific. Mom, dad, 2.5 kids, and a dog named Spot. The wagon was where life happened, where kids fought with siblings on the way to grandma's house, where families learned geography playing license plate bingo on cross-country trips, where kids experienced their first taste of freedom sitting in the way back, facing backwards, making faces at cars behind them. No seatbelts, no airbags, just them and 1/8 of an inch of safety glass between them and the highway at 65 miles per hour. Part of me is amazed wagons existed at all. These cars were rolling monuments to American optimism. Who else would build a vehicle getting 10 miles per gallon during an oil crisis? Who else would make the third row face backwards just for fun? Who else would slap fake wood on the outside of a car and think, yeah, that looks premium? Only us. That's who. But here's what we actually lost when wagons died. Practicality. Yeah, your crossover is practical, but can you fit a 4x8 sheet of plywood in it? Can you sleep in the back on a camping trip? Can you carry 9 people and their luggage? A proper wagon could do all that and still cost less than a modern crossover. We also lost character. Every wagon was different. You had sport wagons trying desperately to be cool. Luxury wagons dripping with leather and chrome. Basic wagons that were just honest, unpretentious transportation. Now every crossover looks identical, like someone inflated a sedan and added plastic body cladding. Where's the personality in that? The death of the station wagon teaches us something profound about American consumer culture. We don't always buy what makes sense. We buy what makes us feel good about ourselves. SUVs and crossovers make people feel safe, capable, and adventurous, even if they never leave the suburbs. Wagons made people feel practical. And who wants to feel practical? Nobody, apparently. It also shows how frighteningly fast things can change. In one generation, wagons went from 17% of the market to essentially zero. The same thing could happen to SUVs if the right combination of factors aligns. Maybe it'll be electric vehicles. Maybe autonomous cars. Maybe something we haven't even conceived of yet. But the one constant is change. There's also a lesson about unintended consequences. Cafe standards were supposed to make cars more efficient, but just push people into trucks and SUVs with worse mileage. Safety regulations made cars heavier, which made them less efficient. Every solution created new problems. It was like playing automotive whack-a-mole with no winning condition. But maybe the biggest lesson is about loss. We lost something real when wagons disappeared. A connection to a simpler time, a more optimistic America. A world where a family car was just that, a car for the family. Not a statement, not a lifestyle choice, just honest transportation that did what you needed it to do. So I have to ask, do you remember riding in a station wagon when you were younger? What model was it? I'm genuinely curious what wagon memories are out there. Did your family have the classic Country Squire with wood paneling? Maybe a Volvo wagon for you safety-conscious folks? Or were you one of those lucky kids who got to ride in a Vista Cruiser with the skylights? What do you think really killed the wagon? Do you agree with my theory that it was a lethal combination of the oil crisis, minivans, and SUVs? Or do you think there's more to the story? Maybe wagons were always doomed, and it just took us a while to realize it. And here's a question I really want you to consider. Do you miss having real station wagons as an option? Or do you think crossovers and SUVs are genuinely better? Because I'll be honest, I'm completely torn. My brain knows modern vehicles are safer, more efficient, and more capable. But my heart misses those long, low wagons with their ridiculous fake wood and backwards-facing seats. For those of you who actually own a wagon, not rode in one as a kid, but bought one with your own money, what was that experience like? Were you fighting against the stereotype of being a boring suburbanite? Or did you embrace the practicality? And why did you eventually get rid of it? Be brutally honest. Was it because you needed something different? Or because you wanted something cooler? I'm also curious. Would you buy a wagon today if they made them? And I mean a real wagon, not a lifted Outback or a Mercedes E-Class that costs more than a house. Something like a modern Country Squire with 3 rows of seats, a big V8, or maybe a hybrid setup for the modern era, and yes, fake wood paneling. Would that interest anyone? Or have we moved too far past that era to ever go back? For you car enthusiasts out there, what's your favorite wagon of all time? Could be American, European, Japanese, whatever. What wagon do you think represents the absolute best of what the body style could be? Will wagons ever make a legitimate comeback in America? Or are we destined to drive progressively taller vehicles until we're all cruising around in monster trucks? Is there any hope for those of us who think lower is better and wagons are wonderful? Whatever other thoughts you have about the station wagon, leave them in the comments. Thank you for watching.